There is a moment, somewhere in the quiet space between two worlds, when a life can split in half. Inside the bright lights of an NBA arena, a 19-year-old rookie stood beside Kobe Bryant, trying to absorb everything: the noise, the cameras, the promise of a future shaped by talent and discipline. For a kid from the projects of Atlanta, it felt like stepping into another universe, one where dreams finally drowned out the sound of sirens. But shadows have a way of following you, even into the brightest rooms. On the other side of that spotlight was a different life, a different set of rules, a world where loyalty was measured by fear and respect was earned with violence. And somewhere along the line, Javaris Crittenton found himself walking between those two universes, slowly losing his balance. Some stories collapse all at once. Others crack quietly, long before anyone notices. So what turns a rising NBA prodigy into a fugitive running from murder charges? And at which moment did Javaris Crittenton lose control of the story he thought he was writing? Long before the headlines, long before the mugshots and the courtroom doors, Javaris Crittenton was a quiet success story growing up in a place where success rarely survived. In the early 2000s, the projects on Atlanta's southwest side were worn down by time and violence. Apartment walls held memories of raids, sirens, and arguments no child should hear. But inside one of those units was a boy who refused to be defined by the noise outside. Teachers remembered him as the kid who always raised his hand first, a straight A student, a class president. In Los Angeles, everything looked perfect from the outside. Javaris was 19, wearing the iconic gold and purple, taking warm-up reps beside one of the greatest players to ever touch a basketball. Fans recognized him in airports. Kids asked for autographs. Commentators called him a future cornerstone of the franchise. But beneath the surface, something quieter and far more dangerous was happening. Being drafted to the Lakers is a dream for most rookies, but for Javaris it was also an abrupt culture shock. He went from being the star of every room to a young player fighting for minutes in a system built around Kobe Bryant's relentless pursuit of perfection. Kobe lived in the gym. He studied film like it was scripture, and he expected everyone around him to sacrifice their ego to the grind. For Javaris, the pressure felt heavier than anything he'd carried before. He wasn't used to being overlooked, to standing on the sideline while the veterans controlled the floor. His confidence wavered, and the walls of the NBA politics, roles, expectations felt tighter by the day. Then came the night that changed the trajectory of his life. One summer evening, in a Hollywood nightclub pulsing with lights and bass, Javaris noticed a crowd forming around a young Atlanta rapper known simply as Dollar. He wasn't just a musician. He was a rising figure in Los Angeles street culture, diamonds flashing, designer clothes, a circle of men who moved with the swagger of people accustomed to being feared. Javaris approached out of curiosity. He stayed out of admiration. And by dawn, he was tied to a world that had nothing to do with basketball. The Mansfield Gangster Crips didn't see him as a bench rookie. They didn't calculate his minutes or compare him to other guards. They embraced him instantly. To them, he was someone valuable, someone respected, someone who already carried weight simply by being an NBA player. The validation felt powerful, almost intoxicating. From then on, his double life began. By day, Javaris was at practice, running drills and studying plays. But at night, he was riding through Los Angeles with men who lived by a different code. A code where conflict wasn't settled by words, but by intimidation and consequences. He wasn't yet fully committed, but the line between curiosity and loyalty was blurring fast. As the season progressed, his minutes remained limited. He bounced from the Lakers to the Grizzlies, then eventually to the Wizards. Each move chipped away at his confidence. Each disappointment nudged him a little closer toward the people who made him feel important. And somewhere in that spiral caught between the bright world he'd earned and the dark world he was choosing, Javaris began to lose his grip on the life he had once fought so hard to build. By the time Javaris reached Washington, the double life he'd been juggling was beginning to tighten around him. The NBA was no longer a dream unfolding. It was a job slipping through his fingers. Minutes were scarce. His role was uncertain. His confidence had thinned into frustration. and frustration has a way of seeking an outlet. During a long team flight in late 2009, the Wizards players passed the time the way many teams do: cards, jokes, trash talk. But that night, the stakes rose higher than they should have. Javaris lost thousands. Words were exchanged. Tempers flared. Gilbert Arenas, already known for his unpredictable sense of humor, pushed things further with taunts that pierced deeper than he intended. For a man trying to hold together two worlds, the rupture came fast. When Javaris threatened to rob Arenas, it wasn't an NBA player speaking. It was the voice of someone who had absorbed the codes of the streets. The lines between identity and survival had blurred, and before anyone could stop it, they were no longer teammates, they were enemies locked in a standoff. A few days later, Javaris walked into the Wizards' locker room with a loaded handgun tucked into his bag. The room felt different that morning. Quiet, heavy, a kind of tension you can feel in your teeth. Gilbert Arenas stepped toward him, mocking the threat from the plane by laying down 4 unloaded guns of his own. What should have been an immature prank spiraled into something far more dangerous. Voices rose, insults sharpened, hands tightened. And for a moment, one breathless moment, the future of 2 NBA careers hovered in the air between 2 drawn weapons. Then, just as quickly, it was over. No bullets, no bodies, only silence. But the damage was done. The league stepped in swiftly. Javaris was charged with misdemeanor gun possession and given a year of probation. The Wizards terminated his contract. And at 22 years old, the kid who once shook David Stern's hand was now unemployed, disgraced, and rejected by the league he had spent his entire life chasing. When he returned home to Atlanta, hoping for the comfort of family, he found something even colder: disappointment, judgment, silence. The people who once celebrated his rise couldn't understand his fall. And for a young man already reeling from shame, that rejection cut deeper than any headline. So he went back to the only place where he still felt welcome: the gang that had embraced him without hesitation. The Mansfields weren't just friends anymore. They were his anchor, his identity, his refuge. By the spring of 2010, Javaris wasn't just affiliated. He was committed. He helped members avoid police. He funneled money into commissary accounts. He slipped further into a world that rewarded loyalty but punished weakness. And in that world, pain doesn't slow you down, it hardens you. Javaris was spiraling quietly, dangerously, toward a moment that would end one life and permanently alter his own. A moment he could never take back. From the outside, it's easy to point to the moment Javaris pulled the trigger and say that was the beginning of the end. But in America, especially in neighborhoods like the ones he came from, the truth is never that simple. Lives don't unravel from a single decision. They crack under pressure built over years, shaped by culture, identity, acceptance, and the constant tug-of-war between who you are and who the world expects you to be. In cities across the United States, young black men often grow up balancing 2 conflicting realities. On one side, school, opportunity, talent, the promise of a future. On the other, street identity, loyalty, the unspoken rules of survival. Those rules don't disappear just because you make it to the NBA. If anything, success amplifies the pressure. Suddenly, everyone is watching. Everyone has expectations. And when your foundation feels unstable, belonging can become more powerful than ambition. To many Americans, Javaris became another cautionary tale, another statistic about wasted talent. Headlines reduced him to a villain or a punchline. But to others, especially in communities shaped by the same struggles, his descent looked painfully familiar. They saw a young man who rose faster than he could adjust, who carried the weight of 2 worlds that were never meant to coexist. The robbery that pushed him over the edge wasn't just about a stolen chain or a watch. In the culture of the streets, being violated publicly is a kind of humiliation that demands a response. Pride becomes survival. Revenge becomes restoration. And in that mindset, logic fades. Emotion takes the wheel. But the cost was devastating. The life he took wasn't that of a rival gang member. It was an innocent woman, a mother simply walking down the sidewalk. Her death rippled through Atlanta, leaving a wound that no apology, no sentence, No explanation could ever heal. And across the country, people asked a question that felt too familiar. How many more young men will slip through the cracks of a system that celebrates their talent but ignores their struggle? Javaris' story wasn't just about a fall from grace. It was a reflection of a larger American tragedy, one where opportunity and violence live side by side, and where crossing the wrong line can end everything in an instant. Inside the quiet of a prison cell, time moves differently. Days stretch, nights echo, and the world you once belonged to becomes a distant memory, fading somewhere between concrete walls and the sound of steel doors sliding shut. For Javaris Crittenton, this is the universe he wakes up to now, a universe far removed from the blinding lights of the NBA, from the roar of arenas, from the brief moment when he stood beside greatness and believed he was destined for something extraordinary. Sometimes, at night, he must replay it all, the draft stage, the first practice with Kobe, the cheers, the pride in his mother's voice when she told people her son was going to make it, moments frozen in time, untouched by the choices that came after. But memory is a quiet judge. It reminds you of who you were before the world tilted, and it forces you to face who you became when you stopped fighting the shadows trailing behind you. What happened in 2011 cannot be rewritten. A woman lost her life, a family lost their foundation, and a young man lost the future he once carried so carefully. The cost was irreversible, and the sentence 23 years became the final punctuation mark on a story that once held endless promise. Yet, buried beneath the tragedy is something painfully human, the reminder that talent alone cannot lift you out of every storm. Opportunity can open doors, but identity decides which ones you walk through. And sometimes, the past you try to outrun is the same past waiting for you in the dark. Javaris Crittenton's story is not about a villain. It is not about a hero either. It is about a life that fractured at the crossroads of two worlds, and the devastating consequences that followed when he stepped into the wrong one.
If stories like this make you rethink what success really means, if they remind you how fragile a dream can be, join us at the Celebrity Breakdown.